In today's episode, we will be discussing the 5 items that make a successful software project. Hey, what's up?
I'm the Coder Kid.
And I'm Mr. Miyagi, and welcome to our show.
Let's talk about the first thing that makes a software project successful.
Okay.
So having clear expectations and requirements at the forefront.
Oh yeah, that's a definite must. Whenever you have a project, a project can't really be a project unless you've got clear requirements and clear expectations and clear roles. Yeah, but
they definitely try.
Those that don't have these elements are doomed to fail. Really, they
are.
You have to have clear expectations. You have to have clear, precise requirements. Without them, a project can go erratically in the wrong direction, and there can be an infinite timeline on them and things like that. And we'll get into some of those details there, but the main high level requirement of a successful project is clear expectations.
What's your goal? What's your MVP?
Yes.
Not enough projects out there doing MVP.
Right.
I think.
Right. Yep. And those are really important. And to dive into the next item of what makes a successful project, to have clear expectations and requirements, you need someone to orchestrate and manage all of these requirements and specific items that developers will be doing in a project, and that comes from your project manager or your BA, which is really just a business analyst, but in the industry they call them BAs.
Yep. Yeah, so what makes a good project manager?
Mm-hmm.
And there are good ones and there are bad ones for sure. And that can definitely make or break a project.
Right.
Project managers are just there, if you don't know yet, what they're there for is just to keep everybody on task, talk between the business and the development team.
Right.
And kind of set clear expectations and answer questions from both sides. That whole communication.
Right. And you can say they're a buffer between the two.
They are. Yeah, they keep you where the business is. It shouldn't be coming directly to the developers.
Right.
And if they let them through, that's usually the PM's fault.
Right. So. And the PM will manage expectations. They'll manage that line of communication. It's the project manager's responsibility to take what the client says and interpret that into some type of user story or user requirement, and give it precise details. And for me, throughout the years, I've seen some really good PMs that are good at taking what a customer wants and documenting it down as requirements. And then there are bad ones that just they just write a headline, they create a user story or create a project item, and there's no detail to it.
And what happens is the developer takes what they think it may be and they write it to their perception. And the acceptance criteria isn't written out for that story or that task. And they do what they perceive as correct, and the business is like, this isn't what we asked for. Right. And that's why you want a PM that can do that.
And sometimes you can, and sometimes I hate to say this term, but you can train your PM too, because I recently worked at a company where some of the project task items or user stories were just headlines, and in the detail section of the user story there were no details. There wasn't any steps to, steps to duplicate or steps to create something, or what is the process flow. It was left up to me. So as a developer, I had to go back and I had to ask specific questions, and then the PM came back and documented the user stories and things like that. So, sometimes if you feel like you have a PM that is not up to snuff, I hate to say that, but you can help them and guide them in the right direction. And that comes with experience too, as an experienced developer.
You didn't know, right?
As a new developer, someone who's new to the industry or something like that, this is your first job. You may not know, how to assist a PM on getting, requirements and user stories set, in the right direction.
But now that you're watching the video, you'll
know. Yeah, you'll know. So ask questions. Help your PM identify. What is this item really supposed to do?
And maybe some issues, like just because it's in the story and it's in the acceptance criteria the developer sometimes can see stuff that the business didn't see, like based on how the code is written, and you want to bring those questions up as a developer. I mean, we're going into more like how can a developer make a project successful, but I mean, that's good to, I mean, you can speak up, you know, you don't just take
these are just things that you can use if you feel like you don't have, you know, what you're getting out of a PM and you're not getting what you need out of a user story and things like that.
Help make your PM great if they're not already. Third thing that we want to go over for making a software development project successful is a good QA person or team based on the size of project.
Right. And a QA team will, you know, verify that you know, what's in the user requirements is actually what was developed and coded by a developer and sent off, you know, into maybe a QA server or things like that. You know, sometimes as a developer, we will read user stories and we, you know, you touched on it, our expectation or our interpretation of what a requirement is may not sometimes be exactly what it is. And it's the QA team that comes back and they verify, and you know they will come back and say, hey, you know, I don't know if you read this, but you may have missed this one small detail of the user story and things like that.
And if a QA person is coming to you more than, I mean, once in a blue moon, they don't know how to test a certain story, but if they're coming to you and you're basically the QA, you're just telling them like what to test, and you're just telling them the things that will make your thing pass. That's probably a good sign that you have a bad QA. So they should be able to, you know, know what they don't have to come to the developer constantly for stuff.
Right. Well, you know, most QA people they take the requirements just like we do, and they understand them. And while we're writing the code, they're writing out their test cases. You know, QA guys are gonna and gals are gonna sit there and they're gonna write down, okay, to test this specific requirement, what do we need to do? What QA steps do we need? And they have their own checklist. And when we check in our code and it gets deployed to a QA server and it's ready for testing, the ticket's marked for QA, then they have their checklist of items that they need to go through and you know, and that's a sign of a good QA person or a good QA team or a good QA process is to document all of these. Items.
And also if you get annoyed by them, it's a good sign because they're finding bugs in your code.
You know, early on, probably about three jobs ago, I had a QA person, and they were decent. And then they hired this other woman, and she could find a bug in everything. And after a while, I was like, God dog it! I kept getting stuff sent back, and you know, and at first I was frustrated, but then I realized, hey, she's really good. And then when we moved on to when we were at the same company together, when we first started working together, we had a really good QA person too. She always found something. No, regardless of how good or you know you thought and how sound your code is, how sound your code was, she found something.
She'll humble you.
So those are the marks of a.
But in the end, you better catch them there, or it's better to catch it there than in production. Right.
Yes.
And then your clients or who you're serving the software have nothing to you know. You'll still have bugs, but I mean, if you can limit the number of those.
Sound QA team. It's a definite must to having a good successful project. So, what's the next one you want to talk about?
So let's go into the fourth thing, which is the process flow. If that sound, your project may be successsul or will be successful. So what we're talking about this is from the writing the code up to deployment.
Right.
So you had some thoughts on this one. So.
Well, I just think that you know from code to deployment there has to be sound steps to get to each point. There has to be a checklist, and a lot of that stuff is driven through some of the management software that you use. Some people use DevOps. What was the other one that we used over
DevOps,
Azure DevOps, and there's another one by Aladdin. What is it? Jira. Sorry,
Jira.
Had a little bit of a brain fart there, but anyway, Jira, and Azure DevOps. Those are probably the two most common tools that you'll use to manage,
your flow of tickets or stories from the start of development to testing to completion, to all the way to in production.
Right. And then there are certain triggers that you can that these applications use. I'm not sure if Jira has what DevOps has, because I know how when you configure DevOps is when a specific ticket gets to this certain point, you can set up continuous deployment and things like that. When it hits a certain
I don't think it's specifically with Jira, but you can use things like TeamCity and some CI/CD things. Azure DevOps kind of has that, which kind of sells it.
Yeah, it kind of sells it on its own, because you don't have to rely on.
But used to have like 3 different things. One did CI, one did CD, and then one was for your Scrum.
Yeah, so Azure needs to come and sponsor one of our videos sometime. But if you can set that up and your process flow is sound, then that makes a good project.
And I think this also can tie into, as a development team. I haven't seen or I haven't put up with for too long where you have a one code environment. And that's like production. They're out there. They are out there.
They are. They definitely
so I think it's worth mentioning, like, how you can help make a project more successful is also from that viewpoint of setting multiple environments.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you can have a local, a development, a QA, a UAT or staging, and a production server. And you may not need all of those. But at least, at a bare minimum, have a development, a QA, and a prod. Well, I fight for staging too.
Staging or UAT, though, staging and UAT are probably one and the same. It just depends on your company.
And some people do UAT and staging, like they have two. So.
Yeah, but most commonly you'll have, like you said, development, QA, and staging, or UAT and production.
And then you'll have 4. And that can help you find, because the idea here is. Prod and staging kind of mirror each other. Sometimes even the data mirrors pretty closely. They'll just take a copy and scrub the sensitive data. And it's real easy to find if bugs will exist in prod, because development branch, they'll have a bunch of bugs. We're just playing in there.
Because you're playing in there.
And the data is bad and all that.
But once you get everything checked in and it gets over to the QA server, at that point, you're working with code that's probably going to get out to production unless there's bugs.
Exactly. But, so that can just set your team up for more success. So let's talk about the final thing, the fifth one.
Yeah, one of the things that all developers have to fight on. Drives me crazy is scope creep. You have all of your requirements defined, and as a developer, you've gone through each step and you've coded it. And you get it out to the development server. The QA guys are ready for it. It gets deployed to QA. They QA it. And then we want to give a demo before we get it out to UAT to the customer, just so that they want to take a look and see what we've been developing for them. And they see what you're doing, and they're like, oh, that's really great, but wouldn't it be nice if it did this? If you added this type of functionality, and you're like, well, yeah, okay. And, if you don't have a sound project manager to be that buffer and say, look, we will take that under consideration and put it in the backlog, and then maybe we'll get it in the next iteration of deployment of development. Then a lot of times some project managers will just give in, and they'll allow the scope creep to come in. But what they don't realize is that you've already tested this thing. It's gone all the way through the process.
Thing. Is it worth the value, or is it not with this little piece in it?
And I think you have to start over. You have to go back and start over.
I think PMs or BAs have a hard time. They could if you don't have a good one. The business, of course, is always going to say, yes, this is a must. You have to find out their true must versus wants. And you have to and sometimes you will have a must. They'll be like, oh, we just didn't think about that. We didn't plan for it. And it will be a little scope creep.
I think
but if you can limit that.
I think the important thing is for the question to be asked, is this something you really need, or is this just something that would be nice to have? Is it a nice to have? If it's a nice to have, great. We'll document it. we'll put it in the backlog, and we'll have it prioritized and things like that, and estimated out, and then we'll get it in the next feature release.
So let's wrap this video up for making a project, how to make one successful.
Yep. And if you have any comments, you got any further suggestions, be sure to put it in the comment section.
Yep.
In today's episode, we will be discussing the 5.
I'm holding up 5.
Hold it up after I say it.